Today we're going to talk about the order of operations. For the most part, I feel like you guys remember the order of operations from elementary school, but I have a nice little graphic for you over here. But before you even look at that graphic, these are the same problem, I know. But I want you to work out one of them. It doesn't matter which one. And then I'm going to work out the same problem two different ways, and we're going to decide which way is correct. Alright, so you go ahead, pause the video, and work it out. Alright, so I have the same problem worked out two different ways, and I didn't make any careless mathematical errors. However, only one of them is correct, and this shows exactly why we have to use the order of operations. Since I didn't make any careless mistakes, if we did not have the order of operations, we would all get different answers for all of our problems, which makes absolutely no sense. So, hopefully, you chose to work your problem out this way, not this way. Have to follow the order of operations. A lot of you learned PEMDAS. Some of you may have learned, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. The P, however, is for parentheses, but in middle and high school, you're also going to be talking about brackets, braces, and even the fraction bar. Okay? Those are grouping symbols also, and I'll talk about those as we get there. Exponents. The reason the M and the D are together in step 3 is because we go from left to right when you have both of those operations in your question. Same thing for addition and subtraction. They are step 4, and you would go from left to right when you have both of these operations in the same problem. Next, I want to remind you of the different ways we can show multiplication. I did not put 6 with the X like I did up here and a 4 because I know you know that. We want to be careful when we are doing algebraic expressions not to use the X as a multiplication symbol because we would think it would be a variable or we wouldn't know what to do with it. So you can use the dot, parentheses around the first, parentheses around the second. Remember, if nothing's between there, it tells you to multiply. Both of them in parentheses. When you add variables in there, a number right beside a variable tells us to multiply, as well as a variable beside a variable. All right, let's get started. Evaluate just tells you to work it out or solve it. Those are some very common directions that we use in middle and high school, so make sure that you get used to understanding those. Okay, so let's take a look. If we're going to follow our order of operations, everybody stops right here and says, you do the parentheses first. But if you look inside, there's just one number. So there's nothing to do inside of the parentheses. So we move on to step 2, exponents. Well, we have one of those, so you're going to do that first. I prefer to underline what I'm working on at the time. Some students like to use the upside down, like a V. Some people call it a caret. You can do that, but you need to mark it somehow so you know which one you're working on, which term you're working on, and it will also let you know which terms you have not included yet. And one thing that I would like to remind you about is also do not rearrange the order. Keep the terms in exactly the spot that they're in as you bring them down. All right. So here we go, 3 cubed. Well, that means 3 times 3 times 3. Remember with exponents, this does not say multiply those two numbers. This says how many of the base number to multiply by itself. And in this case, they are negative. Okay? So, negative 3 times a negative 3. I probably should write that down for you. I'll do it right here. Negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9 times a negative 3 is a negative 27. So directly below that we're going to write in parentheses negative 27. The reason I'm including the parentheses is because there's just a sign here, and if I didn't put the parentheses, it would look really funny if we had plus minus 27. Okay? Now bring all of the terms straight down from where they were before. The only time you should come out on the side and do any work is when the numbers are large, or you need to do a little bit with the negatives over here. That helps you to keep organized. If you don't do it the way I'm showing you, you're going to eventually make a careless mistake about leaving out a term or doing something twice, because if you don't know what you've done and what you haven't done. All right, so we did step 2. Now we look for multiplication, division. Oh, there's some multiplication. So I'm going to underline that, and I need to do 27 times 4. And that would be 108. Is it a positive or a negative? I hope you said a negative. Different signs. The product will be negative. Bring everything straight down that we didn't use yet. And you can tell what you didn't use by looking at what's not underlined. All right, so we did that. No division. Step 4, we have addition, subtraction. Well, we have both. So you go from left to right, just like you read. So we're going to do 24 minus 108. So that would be 4 and 84 would be a negative, because the sign of the higher absolute value is what you take. Minus 15. So some of you are going to need to rewrite this as a negative 84 using the additive inverse. And that lets us see that we have 2 negatives to combine, so that means you will add and keep the sign. 84 and 15 is 99. Now, is it a positive 99 or a negative 99? I hope you said negative, because same signs, you will add and keep the sign. There's your answer. Notice that the problem goes kind of in the shape of an upside of a V. I call it a Dorito because I love to eat Doritos. It's one of my favorite chips. But each time you should be getting rid of a term. Do you see how it goes? And you want to draw that for a little while until you get the idea that each time one term is gone, another term is gone. Okay, now let's take a look at the next one. If we look at our order of operations, we're going to do our grouping symbols first. We have this one. So a negative 3 additive inverse tells us that we're going to add and keep the sign. So that would be a negative 4. We're doing this one first. We will need to keep our parentheses because we don't want to confuse ourselves. There we go. All right. Now, exponents, don't have any. Multiplication, division. Well, we have some multiplication right here. 6 times 4, you got it, is 24 plus negative 4. Don't see any more multiplication. This doesn't mean to multiply because you have the plus sign in front. So last we add and subtract from left to right. 24 minus 2 is 22 plus a negative 4. Oh, I'm getting a little lopsided there, guys. Sorry. So that would be 22 plus negative 4. They are different signs, so we're going to subtract and take the sign of the higher absolute value. And that would give us, what was that? I hope you said 18. And it's positive because of the higher absolute value. Alright, I'm going to let you do the next two, pause the video, come back in just a little bit. Welcome back. Hopefully you got negative 113 and a negative 30 for these two. If you didn't, pause the video, go back and check your steps. with mine and see where we did something different. One thing I do want to point out is now that we've been combining integers for a while, a lot of you have noticed the shortcut of instead of having to rewrite with the additive inverse, you know that you're going to just add it and can do it mentally. A negative 18 plus a negative 12 and go ahead and get the 30 without having to write that. If you can do that in your head, doing it mentally, of course I would want you to do that. Negative 18, and you go down 12, goes down to negative 30. So if you can do that mentally without using the additive inverse, that is perfectly fine. Now we're going to talk about algebraic expressions. That's where the variables come in. And at the top, remember, when you have a variable beside a coefficient, that's multiply. Two variables side by side is to multiply, and that's going to come in handy. Here we have 6c plus ab. Well, we can't do anything with that right now because there are no like terms. So luckily, they have told us what each variable equals. So the first thing you have to do is substitute first. Make sure you do that first. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. The most common mistake at first is to write 6, oops, sorry about that, and a negative 8. Well, no. Remember, that means to multiply. So put your parentheses. I'd be careful with the dot, but if you can use the dot and not get confused, that's fine. Bring down your plus, and then when you have AB, that tells you to multiply B times A. So I'm going to need parentheses because it will look crazy if I had plus minus 8. And B, oops, I really could have put the 8 there, but you don't need to because you really want to substitute exactly the way it says. A came first, so write the A first. Sometimes it won't matter, but in this case it wouldn't, but if it were addition or subtraction, it would. And then parentheses and negative 8. Now we just follow the order of operations. If you look in your parentheses, there's nothing to do. Oh my gosh, I made a mistake. C is negative 10. I hope you caught that before I did. Here we go, let me fix it. Sorry. Looks like my pen's running out of ink. Alright, so we have nothing to do inside the parentheses. So we're going to move on down. Do we have any exponents? Nope. We do have multiplication, so take care of that first. 6 times negative 10 is a negative 60. Only do one step at a time. I know you're bright and you want to do everything in your head, more than one thing at a time. Please don't. It doesn't take much more work. It eliminates a lot of careless mistakes. And then a negative 8 times 12 is a negative 96 plus a negative 60. And if you look at that, we need some parentheses. These are the same sign. So 96 plus 60 is 156, and it would be negative because they are the same sign. And again, all of our problems should be in the shape of the Dorito because each time we're getting rid of at least one term. Okay? Alright, I want you to pause the video and do number 6. Come back in just a minute. Hopefully you got negative 23. If not, go back and look at your problem. And here I did a little bit of what I told you not to. But when you're multiplying 3 numbers, you can do all of that in once, especially if you can use the mental math. You can go 2 times 10 times 2, or 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times negative 10 is negative 40. Alright, I want to talk about the next one with you because this is one that won't look like the Dorito shape because it's a fraction. Okay? This is where the fraction bar is used as a grouping symbol. It groups it in a numerator problem and a denominator problem. Again, the first thing you need to do, just like we did up here, is substitute for all the variables. So it's a fraction, just write an equal sign and come out to the side. So we have 6 plus 10 over MP. That means M times P. M is 2, P is negative 4. Okay? And it doesn't matter which problem you do first. I generally like to do the numerator first because it's on top. So that would be 6 plus 10 is 16. If you wanted to do the denominator first, that's not a problem either. Go ahead and do it. And now we're going to focus on the denominator. 2 times a negative 4 is a negative 8. Ooh, that's sloppy. Let's fix it. Over a negative 8. You can't leave it this way. It is okay to leave fractions improper in middle and high school. However, they have to be simplified. This is not simplified. Since it's improper, I'm going to divide the denominator into the numerator and see if it goes evenly, and if not, then I would just simplify the 2. Okay, so 16 divided by 8 is 2. Different signs means it's a negative. So our answer is negative 2. So instead of a Dorito, we have a burrito. It goes to the side when it's a fraction. All right, I'm going to have you work on these two together. Be very careful with those exponents, and I will talk to you when you come back. After I worked them out, I thought maybe we should have done these together. They were a little tricky. So, oops, kind of knocked the paper on what I did. All right, so let's take a look. For this one, when we substitute p, which is a negative 4, you're going to need parentheses because that would be crazy, plus minus 4. And, oh no, I think I messed up. Let me go fix it real quick. I'll be back. Okay, so I had to go back because I didn't have my parentheses written correctly. Thankfully, it didn't mess me up this time. But I put the negative 4 in parentheses, but there were also parentheses here saying that we have to do all of this before we square it. And it's not just the negative 4 squared. And that may be where you messed up if you messed up. One thing I want to point out over here, when we substitute for p, you bring this minus down, but p is also a negative. And that negative inside the parentheses tells us that we're going to be doing negative 4 times a negative 4. Okay? And you bring the minus down. Again, those of you that can do this step without using the additive inverse and still get a negative 12, that's really what you want. The goal is eventually to be able to do all of that mentally. But if you have to write that step, then go ahead and write it below. And when I was making the notes, I didn't even realize they were both going to be negative 12. All right, for our last one, this one says evaluate s cubed if s equals negative 1/3. So that is telling us s, which is negative 1/3. Now all of that needs to be cubed, not just the 1/3, but the negative. So you're going to have to put it in parentheses and put your exponent here. Otherwise, you would just do 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3. And then put a negative. That doesn't always work, so don't get in the habit of it. Write it out. 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3, which is, now don't make a careless mistake here and say 9. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. And I made a little boo-boo. There needs to be a negative. So a negative times a negative is a positive. Oh my gosh, I made another one. I wrote what I told you not to write. So a negative times a negative is a positive 1/9 times a negative 1/3. You can't see what I'm writing. And a negative times a positive is a negative 1/27. Be very careful. Even I make careless mistakes. So, that is a review of order of operations. As you see, it does get much more difficult. I hope that really helps, and I will see you next time.